You know, the story of the US economy right now, well, it's probably not the one you've been hearing. While all the headlines seem to be pointing toward trouble, the actual data is painting a completely different and, frankly, a really fascinating picture. This is the vibe, right? It's the phrase we hear all the time. The general feeling, the story that's been building, is that things are cooling off, that the economy is kind of struggling under the weight of these high interest rates. And look, it's a narrative that seems to make a whole lot of sense. And that's the big question we have to ask. Because when you actually start to look past the headlines and dig into the real numbers, that whole story about an economy in trouble, it really starts to fall apart. 3.8%. Let that sink in. That's the annualized growth rate of the US economy, based on the very latest data. It is the fastest pace we have seen in nearly 2 years. And this one single number just throws a massive wrench into that whole troubled economy story. So, what we've got here is a classic economic contradiction. On one side, you have this widespread belief that things are slowing down. But on the other, you've got hard data that says the economy is, well, actually heating up. And this clash is right at the heart of a huge debate that's happening as we speak. So let's dig in. We're going to take a look at the numbers that are fueling this unexpected strength. And we're going to see why they're creating such a tough puzzle for the nation's top economic policymakers over at the Federal Reserve. So, what exactly is going on here? What is making the economy look so robust when pretty much everyone expected it to cool down by now? The answer, it turns out, is in a few key spots. Now, the really important thing to realize is that this isn't just one random number. That GDP growth was actually revised up to 3.8%. And what's pushing it? Well, it's two main engines. You and me, consumers, we're still out there spending, and businesses are increasing their spending too. And all the while, the labor market is holding incredibly steady. And speaking of that stable labor market, just look at this. The latest number for new weekly jobless claims was just 218,000. That is a very, very low figure. It confirms this kind of weird but stable situation where we have both low hiring and low firing. Companies just aren't letting people go. But of course, it's never really that simple, is it? While business spending looks pretty strong on the surface, if you start digging into the details, well, you find a much more complicated picture, especially in this area called durable goods orders. Okay, so the nuance here is absolutely critical. The headline number for these durable goods orders was up 2.9%, which sounds great, but that increase was almost entirely because of super volatile airplane orders. Meanwhile, if you look at orders for key tech stuff like computers and chips, they were actually down. So the economy's strength isn't quite as broad as it looks at first glance. And all of this complex, kind of contradictory data lands right on the doorstep of the Federal Reserve. I mean, it is their job to keep the economy in balance. But how are you supposed to do that when the signals are so mixed, yet still pointing towards strength? This right here is the central question that is tearing them apart. For months, pretty much everyone expected that the Fed would start cutting interest rates to help what we all thought was a slowing economy. But with GDP chugging along at 3.8% and a rock-solid labor market, the argument for cutting rates suddenly becomes much, much harder to make. And you can see this division perfectly in two of the Fed's governors. On one side, you've got Governor Myron. He's arguing that policy is already excessively restrictive and that it's risking the health of the economy. But then on the other side, you have Governor Schmidt, who says, hold on, inflation is still too high, and our current policy is exactly in the right place. They are looking at the very same data and coming to completely opposite conclusions. Governor Myron's point isn't really that the economy is about to fall off a cliff tomorrow. His concern is more about the future. He believes that by keeping rates this high for too long, the Fed is actively creating risks to the downside and basically inviting a future slowdown that we could otherwise avoid. But Governor Schmidt sees the world completely differently. He looks at that stable labor market and says things are largely in balance. From where he's sitting, the economy is plenty strong enough to handle the current interest rates, and the number one job should still be fighting inflation, which he thinks is too high. And Governor Myron's view on this, it's becoming more and more isolated. Other really influential voices at the Fed, like Governor Goolsbee, are looking at this same strong data and starting to question why we would need to front-load rate cuts at all. So all of this leads to a standoff. The surprising strength of the economy has basically frozen the entire debate. That clear path toward rate cuts that so many people were expecting, it's pretty much vanished. And in its place, we have this deep division right inside the Fed itself.
I mean, when you're facing economic data this strong, the argument for immediate rate cuts has lost so much ground that its main champion, Governor Myron, is now seen as being on his own island within the Fed's big policy committee.
And that leaves us with the ultimate question. The economy's defying all expectations, right? It's proving to be way more resilient than anyone really thought. Now, that's good news, but it creates this massive policy dilemma. When the data is strong, but the very experts who guide our economy are fundamentally divided on what it all means, what happens next? That is the uncertainty facing all of us right now.